Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. On behalf of the organizers, it is my great pleasure to welcome you to the Youth Science Policy Network, to the ISP-CWP First Public Consultation. My good name is Kirigo Ashira, a medical student and a task force associate of the Children and Youth Major Group working on the thematic area chemicals, waste, and pollution. And I'm glad to be serving you as the moderator for today's session. And we are delighted to gather participants from across regions and disciplines for what is very timely and a very important conversation. As many of us know, the Intergovernmental Science Policy Panel on Chemicals, Waste, and Pollution represents a major step in global environmental governance as strengthening the world's response to one of the three planetary crises, that is climate change. We have chemicals, waste, and pollution, and biodiversity loss. So today we'll be focusing on pollution. And today's consultation recognizes something equally important, that the youth and early career experts, researchers, and communities must help shape that future from the very, very beginning. And this is not just a discussion, but yet another opportunity to co-create pathways from participation, inclusive coordination, and long-term impact. So ahead of you and in readiness for what we have, I just want to tell you that we have a very rich program ahead, which will include welcome remarks, expert reflections, and insights from past plenary and breakout discussions, where your voices will directly shape the next steps. So a few housekeeping notes. Please keep microphones muted when not speaking. Feel free to engage actively in the chat. And most importantly, bring your ideas, honesty, and ambition into today's dialogue. And with that, it's my pleasure to invite our first speaker, Stephen Staywan, who serves as the thematic focal point for climate action to deliver the welcome remarks. Stephen, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the introduction, Kiriko. And it is an honor to also meet the representatives of various groups here, also including but not limited to early career researchers, scientists, and also young people working in STEM. Also distinguished colleagues from various organizations, UNEP accredited organizations, and other organizations. Welcome to this event. As being told by our MC Kirigo, I'm Steven Setiawan, one of the thematic focal points of Climate Action Working Group, together with my colleague who is also here, Clarence Kio Almoite. So on my welcome remarks, I would like to introduce you to the organizer of this current meeting, which is CYMG. But first of all, we would like to explain about UNEP. So as we know that UNEP stands for UN Environment Program, which is a UN body coordinating global environmental action. UNEP addresses particularly but not limited to triple planetary crisis, which are climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution through four types of activities from norm setting and environmental governance, environmental science policy interface, advocacy and communications, and capacity building and technical assistance. So with this function, today we will focus on the environmental science policy interface, which just being completed on the view of triple planetary crisis less than a year ago through the establishment of the Intergovernmental Science Policy Panel for Chemicals, Waste, and Pollution, presided by IPBES in 12 or 13 years ago, and also preceded by IPCC to complete the trifecta science policy for addressing triple planetary crisis. And then we will go to the next slide. So to engage with UNEP, there is a mechanism for civil society to engage with UNEP processes, including but not limited to the multilateral environmental agreements, agreed conventions, meetings, etc. So to facilitate engagement and ensure representation of civil society, there are something called major group system, in which each major group elects two facilitators and then they form major group facilitating committee. And children and youth is one of the nine major groups who are engaging with UNEP in their processes. So to the next slide. So that's the idea about CYMG. CYMG stands for Children and Youth Major Group. We are the mandated constituency to coordinate children and youth engagement in UNEP's processes. It's according to the nine major groups via Agenda 21 at the 1992 Rio Earth Summit, and also being recognized by the UNEA Resolution 7/6 that was formalized in December 2025. On our membership, we represent more than 2,000 youth organizations and network, 68 of which are UNEP accredited, and we have over 15,000 individual members from 130 plus countries. And our mission is to support youth environmental leadership through active policy advocacy to expand youth access to decision-making processes and building capacity. And today's event is one of the implementation of our mission. So without further ado, I will give back to our MC Kirigo to introduce us to the second speaker, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephen, for those inspiring opening remarks and for grounding today's discussion in the broader urgency of environmental action and youth leadership. And we continually appreciate your leadership and contribution. And now, allow me to move us to the next segment. And we'll be having Olga, who is our next speaker. Olga Skaredina, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, who will present on youth engagement in the open-ended working group process and the CYMG's key policy contribution. And I want us to take note that this is valuable as we reflect not only on the participation, but again on how we, the youth, engage and can be substantive, strategic, and policy shaping. So Olga, thank you for joining us today. And again, the floor is yours. Over to you.
Thank you, Kirigo, for their introduction, and I am happy to be back to their speaking floor of CYMG because formerly I was serving as a science policy thematic facilitator, and I have recently stepped down so that we have their transition. If we move forward to the next slide, I would be introducing certain aspects of how CYMG has engaged in their wake process and has followed negotiations on the science policy panel from the start until the end. And everything has started with the wake session in Bangkok, Thailand, where we had small but mighty team where we have just started understanding what was the purpose of the process and started forming youth positions and identifying what priorities would be essential for young people to engage in the science policy interface that was just establishing. Moving forward, we engaged in Wake in Nairobi, which was in 2023 in December, where we again had a small team on the ground and where their discussions has activated and where stakeholders, including CYMG, were actively engaging in putting proposals forward and introducing the priorities that have been established through the round of virtual consultations with young people, with members of CYMG, with accredited organizations, and any other interested individuals. And what this session is also important for is that CYMG has established the Youth Consultative Meeting as a practice to engage early career experts before the negotiations start so that we can consolidate our inputs into coherent strategy and move forward with more solid representation on the ground. Fast forward, it is Geneva, Wake 3.1, where it was supposed to be the last session of negotiations, but unfortunately, the member states could not agree on certain aspects of the panel, how it would operate, what would be their foundational principles, and what would be the host of the panel. Spoiler alert, we still do not know who will host the panel. For now, it is operated from Nairobi. And in Geneva, we had finally bigger representation. We were joined by young people and organizations that were based in Europe and from around the world. And there we were mostly advocating for the principle of intergenerational equity that would become one of their foundational principles of the panel and would guide the work, taking into considerations the interests and needs of present and future generations. And then last year in June, we had the last session of the panel in Punta del Este in Uruguay, where we also had a small gathering of the youth consultative meeting where we finalized our strategy for engagement. And by the end of the meeting, we finally had the panel established. And I think Stephen was shy to admit that he was also there in the negotiation rooms together with Jana Asil, who is unfortunately not able to be here, and me. We were their mighty group that were following negotiations from the start. If we move and fast forward to the next slide, I have outlined 10 priorities that we have been pushing forward from the start of negotiations, and as I've mentioned earlier, that were shaped together through virtual consultations with young people and constituents of CYMG, and hopefully some of you have joined those meetings. First and foremost is the principle of intergenerational equity, as I've mentioned earlier, to guide the work of the panel. And this principle is still on the table in the text, which is considered a sort of success for the youth advocacy that we had on the ground. Next priority was to ensure multi-stakeholder collaboration so that there is a strengthened partnership and coordination, and we have diverse forms of knowledge integrated into the work of the panel. Then we have advocated for the Youth Expert Advisory Group, which is a group of young experts that would be engaging with the panel as part of their official mechanism, interdisciplinary expert committee. Unfortunately, this proposal didn't go through, but this is an idea to keep in mind and develop further for any future engagement. Then it is the emphasis on the human rights-based approach, especially on the clean, safe, and sustainable environment, and then flexible and iterative approach, which means that the panel should follow the principles of continuous learning, evidence-based adjustments, and being responsive to emerging findings and technological innovations. Because one of the criticisms that current science policy panels face is that they are too rigid, too formal, too bureaucratic, and they do not necessarily serve the needs for what they were created. If we move to the next slide, it is their continuation of the principles, and the sixth priority that CYMG identified was complementarity, meaning that the panel should have the principles that complement each other, and this includes also transparency, accountability, and the precautionary approach, so that it is mutually reinforcing pillars of the science policy interface. And strong conflict of interest. Unfortunately, in the negotiations, they were not able to touch upon this topic almost at all. And this is something that will be discussed in the subsequent sessions of the plenary. Then another priority for young people is capacity building. And capacity building, which would include any training and expert sessions for young people, for stakeholders in general, and for young people in particular. And ninth and 10th priorities, it is adaptive outreach and awareness raising, as well as focusing on communities in vulnerable situations. And if we move to our next and last slide, I have outlined 5 points that CYMG has identified as something that can emerge from this science policy panel. And before proposing these points, we did a research where we looked into existing science policy interfaces, which is IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, EBAS, Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, on GEO, Global Environmental Outlook, as well as IRP, International Resource Panel. So we looked into all these four mechanisms and identified the best practices that they use for promoting youth engagement. Some have more or less established mechanisms, while others not so. And the first one is our novel idea of the Youth Expert Advisory Group that I've mentioned earlier and that did not go through. But the next point is the fellowship program. And the fellowship program is something to establish for the early career professionals to follow the processes under the science policy panel, and which would include supporting roles to contribute to the assessments alongside more established lead authors and committees. And this program, this sort of fellowship, already exists under GEO, Global Environmental Outlook, and this is the practice that could be taken forward once the panel is more established. Then we identified another good practice in the form of PhD scholarship program, which exists under IPCC. And basically what they do, they have PhD funds that they allocate to individuals who want to pursue PhD in any university under the theme that is related to the thematic focus of the panel, and that way they kind of promote the science and also uplift early career professionals who want to pursue their doctoral studies. So this could be one of the practices also established under the science policy panel. Their next idea is as a youth network, a mechanism that would allow young people to engage more formally with the processes. And this is the purpose of their consultation today. So I won't be delving into this, and I would delegate this to Jana to explain the entire idea. And the last point is the youth-friendly deliverables and outreach. And this also already exists under GEO because they used to have GEO for Youth, where they would translate the entire report into youth-friendly summaries and outreach materials so that it is easier for young people to read through all their documents and spread the word around their communities, and that their language is not alienated but more familiar to them and easier to spread in their communities. And these are the ideas that could be implemented once the plenary is more established and once they start working on formalizing their stakeholder engagement mechanisms and promoting their meaningful engagement with stakeholders more broadly and young people in particular. So I have said this to establish the background of how CYMG has engaged in the process and what was the thought process behind it and what priorities CYMG has established to move forward with the engagement. And with that, I am happy to get the floor back to Kirigo and to the next speaker.
All right. Thank you very much, Olga. I hope that we can now see where the science policy on chemical waste and pollution is coming from. It's what in climate change they call IPCC, as Olga has mentioned. And I love to see what you've been doing behind the scenes. And we are just riding on the shoulders of great giants. And in this case, the great work that has been done by the team that has been there previously. So by a show of hands or just doing thumbs up, are we picking something? We can see a lot of work has been done. And again, I love the fact that we do not have to again reinvent the wheel. There's some work that has already been done. You already have best practices from Geo, from IPCC, from the Biodiversity Ecosystem Services. We have something to learn. How have the youth been engaged? So thank you so much for those remarks. And again, you've just reminded us that youth participation is strongest when it moves beyond presence and again into influence. And again, you mentioned that through preparation, technical contribution, and consistent engagement without giving up. So this really plays a key role, and we appreciate those insights and examples. Now, allow us to transition to Jana, where she will be speaking to us on her first experience with the YSPN. So I now have the pleasure to hear from Jana Radi, who is also our thematic focal point, and she'll, as I said, she will share reflections from the first plenary experience as well as perspective on the Youth Science Policy Network. She'll give us first-hand reflections from emerging global processes, which are incredible and valuable, especially for those of us seeking to engage meaningfully in the future. So, Jana, welcome and over to you.
Thank you very much, Kirigo. And thank you to the previous speakers as well. My name is Janna Radi, and I am the thematic focal point for the Chemicals, Waste and Pollution Working Group under the Children and Youth Major Group to UNEP. And I've had the pleasure to be a part of the open-ended working group process last year in OEWG 3.2 in Punta del Este in Uruguay with Olia and Steven and Ophil, who was a key role in meaningful youth engagement with Olga, but he was unable to join us today. But just wanted to say a huge thank you as well to Ophil for always creating a meaningful space for young people to engage in the OEWG process. So Olga has already given the history and the backdrop to the OEWG process and what happened from 2022 all the way to 2025. So this year, in 2026, there was the first plenary of the ISP-CWP. But ahead of that, there was some discussion to try to understand what would the goals of the first plenary be. And so this was uncovered a bit more at the United Nations Environment Assembly, the 7th session last year in Nairobi, and especially in the Youth Environment Assembly that was held ahead of UNEA 7, where we had a panel discussion with different representatives. And one of those representatives was Ms. Tessa Govers, who is the principal coordinator and head of the interim secretariat for the ISP-CWP. And through that panel discussion, we quickly learned that the main priority for the first plenary was the adoption of the rules of procedure. Because from the foundational document, which was the main document that was discussed from OEWG 3.2 and what established the panel, there was still no adoption of rules of procedure. It was just a draft. And for those of you who have not engaged in policy spaces before, the rules of procedure basically say the rules of decision making in terms of how are we going to make decisions, who's going to be a part of the panel, what are the different rules, basically. It's the rules of multilateralism for that space, especially for science policy panels. It's quite a unique space where it brings together member state representatives, but it also brings civil society and academia and local communities. So what are the rules in operating in this space, specific for chemicals, waste, and pollution? And secondly, it would be other documents that would be helpful for the science policy panel, such as the work program, the deliverables, as well as the conflict of interest policy, which would underlie how would we choose academics. what would be the steps taken to ensure that there is no conflict of interest of those who are joining the science policy panel. So with that, what the Children and Youth Major Group did from the Youth Environment Assembly in end of November, December, and UNEA, all the way to February, which is quite a short turnover and timeline. But we wanted to do another round of consultations, building up on all of the consultations done previously since 2022 to understand, has anything changed? What are youth perspectives and youth priorities when it comes to the first plenary? One of the outcomes is, again, for the rules of procedure to ensure inclusive, fair, and future-oriented participation, especially to try and lower the structural barriers for early career participation from different geographies, to have clear and transparent observer engagement. That was one of the key priorities in coordination with other major groups and stakeholders and all of the civil society that was going, was to make sure that there was a clear rule for inclusion of civil society, because that was one of the points of contention in Uruguay, was potentially not having a space for civil society to participate in the panel as experts. And so this was something that we continued to advocate for. And thirdly, accessibility of meetings. And with that, we had the consultation in January, 23rd of January, and then we accumulated the main priorities. We circulated it again for further consultation, and that had prepared us for the February session in Geneva. So what happened in Geneva? In February, the 1st of February, there was a hybrid preparatory meeting, actually. So usually before negotiations, there is a day that is dedicated for regional meetings. So countries and member states will participate and coordinate within their different 6 UNEP regions. And additionally, in parallel, there will be a civil society coordination. This was done in all of the previous OEWGs, and it was also done in the first plenary session. However, what was unique in the first plenary session was there was inclusion of organizations and individuals, not just from UNEP accredited organizations, but also from other multilateral environmental agreements, observer status such as the BRS and the Minamata Conventions and the Global Framework on Chemicals, as well as those accredited to ECOSOC. And so it was a very diverse and rich group of civil society. And there was a day to try and coordinate the main points to have interventions on the floor. And then from the 2nd of February to the 6th of February, there was the negotiations themselves. There were different contact groups. And as mentioned, the main discussion was on the rules of procedure. However, unfortunately, as Olga had mentioned, there was no agreement on the rules of procedure, which is the main document that is needed to move forward with the panel, to understand how do we select experts, how do we make decisions. And so the plenary was suspended and there was no agreement on any of the documents. And there was no time to even reach the other documents. We were quite ambitious in our consultations to gather youth priorities on the other documents, but we did not even make it to the other documents. The rules of procedure was a standstill. However, a positive note is that the ISP-CWP now has a chair and it has a bureau. So the bureau has representatives from the different regions that will guide the chair in terms of how to make decisions, and any other decisions that need to happen will be done by the chair in consultation with the bureau. And so the bureau and the chair are still deciding on the next date and the venue to host the resumed session of the first plenary of the ISP-CWP. So this session will be now called P1.1, and there will be a P1.2 moving forward. So what now? Everyone is just waiting. We still don't know when the next date and venue will be, and there's a lot of questions, but the rules of procedure need to, we need to have a rules of procedure because that's the main compass that countries will use in their negotiations. And so until there is a date and a time and a venue to have a country host the next P1.2, we're all waiting for further communication from the Secretariat. And if you do want to follow on what happened in February in Geneva and get updates, I would recommend checking the IISD ENB, the Earth Negotiations Bulletin. They do daily coverage of what happens in negotiations, and you can find what happened in those 4 days, day by day, what exactly had happened if you want to get a feel of the room itself. It was a very tense couple of days. Actually, I personally had never experienced anything like that. And I also follow the plastics treaty negotiations, this was a lot more tense than the plastics treaty negotiations. So it will be quite interesting to see how countries can move forward and reach consensus or find a decision when it comes to the rules of procedure, which is the foundational document for any negotiations when it comes to multilateralism. So with that, we didn't just want to sit and wait as young people, especially those who have been engaging in this process for more than 2 years, observing this process unfold and contributing to it. And so this is what this meeting is for, is the idea of starting to create a youth science policy network called YSPN, which would be an open network, and to start building momentum, picking up from the OEWG process. So the YSPN network would be an open, recognized stakeholder platform that allows youth organizations, academic groups, individual experts, community representatives to basically coordinate when it comes to what we see the future of the panel being, how we want to contribute, what the deliverables should be like, what the work program should be like. And the purpose of the consultation today is to co-create this together as young people who have already been following the process. I see some very familiar names in this call of people who have been in the process since OEWG 1.2. So I'm incredibly excited to hear their thoughts as well. And maybe new people who are just hearing about this for the first time. So the purpose of the consultation today is to look at what would an effective and open coordination space for youth look like. And with that, this is our vision. This is the idea. It's launching a youth science policy network, which would be an open-ended network for youth and early career experts to engage in and contribute to the Intergovernmental Science Policy Panel on Chemicals, Waste and Pollution, the ISP-CWP. And around here, you can see the museum of photos of how youth have been engaging since OEWG 1.2, which makes me incredibly humbled, honestly, as someone who joined the process very late. It was very easy work for me because I didn't engage in the deep research and consultation process that all of these young people have been doing since 2022. So I also want to take this time to really thank all the young people who really pushed forward to make sure there remained a space on the table when it comes to youth engagement in this new panel. And I really think we can make history in this panel to really have strong, meaningful youth engagement from the beginning, from when it has been established. And with that, I believe I am concluding my presentation and will give it back to Kirigo for us now to go into breakout rooms. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jana. We can give a round of applause by a thumbs up, celebrate Jana for being so technical and doing it so well in a very simplified manner. Just getting to understand how the whole process has been like, and just seeing what the youth have been doing. We've not been left behind. We have created spaces for ourselves in those tables. So a big applause to the team that has been working on this, and again to continually celebrate the youth who have been doing this. Thank you, Jana, for sharing those reflections and giving us the experience. I was just trying to go through what happened in February. Did not, and the one of the things we celebrate is that we now have a chair. But again, we still continue pushing, and as the youth, we can show them the way. And with the guidance of the people who are ahead of us, we continue learning and improving what we are doing. So next, we'll now bridge to the breakout rooms, and we now, as we move to the breakout rooms, this is one of the most important parts of today's consultations. And why? Because the discussions in the breakout rooms will bring out our ideas, experiences, and recommendations that can directly shape what comes next. And then the Youth Science Policy Network should not be built for the youth, but it should be built with the youth, and that's what we'll be doing. So I'll allow us to now go into our breakout rooms. There are 3 questions that we'll be focusing on, and one we'll be asking ourselves, where can youth most meaningfully contribute to the panel's work? And 2, what would make it difficult for youth and early career experts to engage in the panel? And 3, what would an effective, open, and transparent coordination space for youth look like? So please identify one rapporteur. I believe Samuel and Stephen will be assisting us with the rapporteuring in each room. who will then share highlights during the report back. And we encourage practical ideas, bold thinking, and conversation. Then now we'll just so Jana, you can help me with that.
Yes, yes, sounds good. There should be breakout rooms. I will open them now. The questions are the same in all of the breakout rooms. So let me just pause the recording and the slides.
Very interactive. There were so many discussions. The first question about where can youth contribute meaningfully the most in the panel's work. Of course, because the panel is not able to do research, so instead, of course, the panel will capture scientific findings from the horizon scanning process. So scanning the whole research publications as well as informations and capturing them into the panel's work. So I think youth role is very evident, which is to make sure that important research, especially research led by the youth in universities, in institutions, NGOs, and think tanks, can be captured within the panel horizon scanning process. And then we need youth who are impacted. That's the first one. We need youth who are impacted by the by the poor chemical and waste governance to actually contribute. I think we can also replicate the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, Action for Climate Empowerment, ACE, the ACE modality. Because I think the breakout group also agreed that, as young researchers, while we are the ones doing the field work, the youth itself, they are doing the on-ground work. Youth has the role to bridge the gap. So, delivering complicated science and translating it into clear and simple steps for policy making and informing all stakeholders, youth and non-youth. So I think this also replicate Jana's and Asil previous work on the summary of the global waste management outlook. So simplifying science is still an important thing. And then, on the first question, lastly, we also tackled regarding, the issue of, before the plenary. So before every plenary meeting of the panel, we need to discuss the interplay between the law and the science itself. And, there should be an in-depth knowledge exchange, not only capacity building, but also knowledge exchange for the youth before every ISPP meeting. And of course, this will enable youth when they are participating in the panel meeting, not only engaging in critical advocacy, but also delivering actionable recommendations and making sure that our work is operational also in influencing the panel work. And then lastly, on the second question, before I jump to the third question, now the second question, what makes it difficult for youth and early career experts to engage in the panel? We agree that, we need to, of course, fight for a mandate for youth engagement in ISPP, making sure that youth experts are well represented, but at the same time, making sure that the language within the panel's deliverable actually advance youth interest. So we are the participants of the breakout room also reflect upon other multilateral environmental agreements, youth and climate science processes. Actually, with the right training, with the right platform, they can be able to contribute. And of course, we need to allow youth who are working with the issue closely. So, for example, this youth, he or she is working, working to tackle pollution, let's say, in his community, in his or her community. But then this youth does not have the adequate academic degree to be considered an expert. But at the same time, the practical experience of this particular individual youth can still be invited to the table, to support the panel work. So, bringing people who are not academically qualified, quote unquote, into the panel work. And lastly, ensuring that, we can push existing research studies to fit into ISPP and identify what are the conflict of interest criteria that should be pushed, especially for studies conducted without sponsorship from the chemical industry. And of course, enhancing feedback mechanism to enhance motivation of the youth participation in the panel. And lastly, on the last question, on what will be the feedback for the YSPN to work meaningfully. Of course, first, which is to involve the accredited NGOs more, invite them to actually engage in the youth spaces. And, also YSPN need to be able to synthesize local issues into global advocacy frameworks or at global advocacy strategy. And then the YSPN should have a flat structure, but still, with a defined roles and learning from the mistakes or the setbacks or the, what other constituencies and networks fall short to achieve. And to close, emphasizing the youth scientist role in horizon scanning function that needs to be, they are positioned uniquely within the ISP itself compared to the IPBES and IPCC. And a lot of the message can be strategically emphasizing youth role on foresight, young scientists receiving cross-disciplinary training. But of course, we need to anticipate lobbyists that are actually also feeding science at the same time to the panel, since ISPP is not doing any research, but of course, the horizon scanning process, aside from, entertaining those who are from the industry, also need to entertain those coming from the youth and ensure active, periodic, and active participation. So periodic and active participation, especially after every panel meeting. So the follow-up works are clear and structured. So yeah, I think reorganizing ourselves is very critical for that notion. Sorry for these long remarks, but I hope it is capturing every essential points that have been discussed by the members. Thank you for all members who have been participating. Thank you, Jana. Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thank you so much, Samuel, for the thoughtful reflections. And I love that you emphasize on the practical pathways for youth contribution, especially linking participation to technical and scientific engagement, and also speaking to the vulnerable youth, those who are actually affected by these chemical pollutions. And again, the whole agenda on environment and protecting the environment, it's about the health of our population and again, protecting our planet for both the current generation and the future generation. So thank you so much, Samuel and the team from the breakout room 1. And then we can now move to Stephen to give us what those in breakout room 2 had. Over to you, Stephen.
Thank you for the folk, Rigo. I think I would not repeat some of the points that we have heard from the first moderator of Breakout Room 1. First of all, thank you for all of the youth who are active in contributing in our input for Breakout Room 2. So I think I will just mention it by question. So on question 1, on how can youth meaningfully contribute on the panel's work, several inputs. First one is on channel youth. We can identify and channel youth scientists among our connections to contribute to the panel, and then to make sure that the contribution will not be tokenistic. And then on another idea is to have scientific assessment support. This is by Kiriko. Thank you for your input. And then also on contributing to, for example, literature reviews, technical inputs, etc. On question number 2, several inputs also on the difficulties of youth and early career experts on financial issue, experience gatekeeping, mental burnout of balancing this kind of works. And then also on this is a good quote by our member Lofish on the how there is a perception gap between the work of the scientists, that often they don't see that their work relevant to the policy making. So this kind of gap exists. And then also another input is on not trained in the science policy processes, limited info, etc. And then on the feedback of YSPN on effective and open coordination, several inputs also on, first of all, on the idea of coordinating inputs from various networks of youth scientists, early career scientists, so we can gather more voices, more people captured, so that we have more lobbying power, approach universities within our network. And then on having a structure, for example, a steering committee, having people from different backgrounds, and then on make this process inclusive and accessible globally, for example, by using simple digital communication. So that's the summary of breakout room 2, and I will give it back to either Kirigo or Jana. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Stephen, for the insights. And across the groups, we can see that there are three clear threads that are emerging. One is that youth really want to contribute meaningfully across technical and scientific domains. And again, second, barriers are not only financial, but also structural and procedural. And finally, there's a strong call for transparent and well-organized coordination mechanisms that are linking directly to decision-making processes. So that's amazing from all of us, and I want to appreciate each one of us for joining us today. And to thank you again and wish you all a productive rest of your day or the evening as I hand over to Jana to close the meeting for us.
Thank you very much, Kirigo, and thank you to our breakout room facilitators. You did a marvelous job keeping the consultation within the time. So that's an incredible skill. I see a hand up. Zuhair, would you like to speak?
Yes. Am I audible?
Yes, yes.
Yes.
Sorry, I cannot turn on the camera, but I wanted to make a comment, especially as because I can remember in our breakout room, one of the speaker was mentioning about learning from the mistakes or maybe some procedural difficulties from other youth constituencies. I would like to make a point because I think this is the first consultation. For if we look at any event process or any formal process, intergovernmental process, we get to see that it's accredited organization who participate, right? They are the not mechanisms, but they're the options for anybody to participate in the panel as observers, unless those are not coming from UN system entities, intergovernmental organizations, or member states. Therefore, this network should strengthen collaboration with accredited organizations as constituents. And I believe that the network should learn from the mistakes from other youth constituents, especially to ensure democracy, transparency, and I have forgotten the exact term, but then how to make progress on decision making, not to have a blockade, like more like a democratic process. For instance, the leadership should also incorporate the global equitable representation of global South youth who are the sufferers, not just youth from a certain region or certain groups, I mean, who are often quite privileged to participate. Obviously, they should also participate, but global South youth should also have equitable representation in the leadership. Then the leadership should rotate, not stick to one person or two-person for long. So that will give opportunities to more and more youth to explore their leadership potentialities in science policy process. And also, if the network is involved in mobilizing resources, they should report it to the constituent and the UN Secretariat to make sure the resources are handled and mobilized and utilized properly, and there is no corruption and the concerns involved. Thank you.
That was great. I'm not sure, Samuel or Stephen, if you can write that down in the
Yeah, I
in
have
your
noted
breakout room.
every points from His Excellency. What a closing remark.
Yes, that's great to close us off. Samuel with his diplomacy as usual. But no, with that, I think there's life cycle of remarks that have been collected, and I want to thank each and every one of you for participating in this first consultation. And we're going to follow up with the recording of this session for you to also share with your networks, or if you want to reflect on anything that was discussed and need to digest further on the information. As well, we'll be following up with some more resources and information that can be helpful moving forward and some next steps. And with that, wanted to thank you again, and we'll also share with the group photo in email. And wanted to thank you for taking time out of your weekend to discuss about this very important issue and to construct something very meaningful and impactful, hopefully, to beat pollution for young people and for generations to come. So thank you all, and we hope to see you very soon again. So please keep your eyes on your emails, and wish you a great rest of your weekend. Thank you, everyone. Bye bye.
Bye bye, everyone.